All right. Sunday night is not all right for horse racing. That experiment has been put on hold for the time being. Is that the right idea?
I think so, definitely. I think it was a poor idea in the first place. I don't think it was well thought out, and I think I'm glad they've, rather than just carry on blindly and thinking they're right, they've actually considered everything properly and have, at the very least, put it on hold. I'd rather see it not be discussed again, personally.
What was most wrong with it, in your mind?
I mean, we've just had Camilla talking about the effects on stable staff and trainers and jockeys, just the additional workload to an already packed schedule for what was effectively low-class racing that would have been run in the midweek at a more palatable time. Doing it at 8:45 on a Sunday night is not beneficial to any of the actual participants in the sport.
Is this a rare example of racing listeningly, or was this simply inevitable because nobody was betting on it?
I think it's a mixture of the two, Nick. I think it was always going to be a hard trial to persevere with once the participants, once jockeys, trainers and racing staff had come out so audibly and vociferously saying, we don't want this. But had the numbers been astonishing, had they ticked all the boxes that were set for them, then maybe we would have had a different outcome. But the reality is the numbers didn't just fail to exceed the parameters set, they were way below, or significantly below. They were being judged against midweek afternoon meetings, and the theory was if there's people betting on those meetings more than they would in the midweek afternoon, maybe we should look at this. But it was actually worse. So that being the case, would have been very, very hard to justify continuing with it.
So that's out, at least for the time being, Sunday night racing. A curious case earlier this week. Tim Vaughan had a horse test positive for a banned substance. It was an adverse analytical finding, and he entered into a plea bargain with the BHA, which he thought, and I think the BHA also thought, Lee, would result in a suspended sentence, a suspended withdrawal of his licence. It would be a 3-month suspension, suspended for 6 months. What he's actually ended up getting is a 6-month suspended sentence for 18 months. Now, short term, he can carry on training, but one more adverse analytical finding, and boom, he's out for 6 months, and he's got an 18-month period within which not to offend, and nobody could quite figure out why.
Yeah, and one reason why nobody could quite figure out why, Nick, is that most unusually, or relatively unusually, this was a BHA disciplinary panel hearing at which the media were not allowed to attend.
Until the verdict came out.
Yeah, generally it's the case that people like you or I can sit in on those meetings, can observe and can report, and that allows for transparency of the justice process. That wasn't the case here. All we are left to do until we see the full written reasons from the panel is to try and assume what has happened here. As you say, it's very unusual that the BHA has a position before the disciplinary panel, and the disciplinary panel will actually take a stricter, more stringent line than the regulator has sought to have carried through. There is a possibility that the panel was looking at a previous infringement in relation to 2 horses that Tim Vaughan had, going back to last year, but we can only guess at that, Nick, because until we actually see the written reasons, we don't know. Because
the BHA would have known about those previous offences when they entered the plea bargain.
I mean, they wouldn't know about anything like that, and they're relatively recent as well. So they're not like they're on his record from 10 years ago.
So we'll have to wait until the written reasons come out. But I suppose, very quickly, one thing we can say is that if you have an independent disciplinary panel, that's what they're there for, not simply to do the BHA's bidding.
Absolutely.
So the process is working somewhat.
It's not a bad thing in that sense, absolutely.
OK, here we go. I mean, how many times has watering appeared on this? The Haydock and Warwick in particular, and their clerks, Dan Cooper and Nessie Chanter, came under fire this week for putting water on the track. Warwick ended up getting abandoned because they had standing water, and they had almost a sort of flash flood situation on the jumps track. Slightly different at Haydock, which probably wasn't as bad as we thought it might be in the middle of the week. Dan put 5 mils on when there was an adverse forecast. Hector, who'd be a clerk of the course first of all, but what was your reaction to this? There was a bit of a furore earlier in the week.
there seems to have been a shift, definitely, in recent years of they're supposed to be providing good to firm ground or good to firm ground for flat racing. And Haydock has been notorious over previous seasons for being quite a long way far of good to firm. And it looked, I mean, then when they were watering with the predicted forecast, it seems inevitable that you're going to get heavy soft ground.
I mean, Dan Cooper I spoke to earlier in the week, and he said that the forecast had been working on Monday night into Tuesday wasn't as bad as what materialised. Other people will say, well, my forecast said there were going to be 40 mils, 50 mils, whatever. You know, clearly he's working off a dud forecast in the first instance, but what difference did his 5 mils make?
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought it made a huge difference at all in the great scheme of things. And I do sometimes think that the Clarks are a relatively easy target. Yes, they're going to get things wrong because we all get things wrong, but nobody would set out to be watering if they thought a deluge was likely to form the track. And
I suppose the wider point that Hector's making is, are Clarks just less happy to maintain good to firm than they used to be? Or are they always trying to ease to the good side?
Well, potentially. I think that it's certainly the case when you look at multi-day meetings. So, for example, we're going into Epsom next week, aren't we? Friday, Saturday. Now, Andrew Cooper would almost certainly be very reluctant to start Oaks Day on good to firm ground because he knows, for example, Epsom dries out very quickly. He would not want to be watering Friday night into Saturday, and therefore he would probably be happy to be starting on good ground, knowing it might then become good to firm on Derby Day. And
he got a whole load of abuse a few years ago for watering, and then it hammered down on Oaks Day afternoon. One thing I wanted to touch on with you is the reluctance of trainers to run horses when the word firm's in the description, and the extent to which that has meant that the clerks of the course are getting quite anxious. And so they're like, well, if I leave it with firm in, I'm going to get a load of non-runners.
Yeah, it does seem to be the case that, you know, there's considerably smaller fields when firm does appear in the going description. I don't know the reasons behind that, whether the breed itself is slightly less accustomed to it with years of breeding on good ground,
and
good watered ground.
Training on synthetics.
Exactly. You know, there's some trainers don't use grass at all, and others swear by it. It's not an isolated issue with the Clark. It's definitely an industry-wide issue, and certainly when firm is in the going description, you're much more likely to get smaller fields.
Every year, it seems, we approach the Derby, and every year somebody who's developed an association with a horse is taken off the horse to be replaced by somebody else. And obviously this year it's happened in quite high-profile fashion, with the current second favourite Ambiente Friendly now being ridden by Rab Havlin, replacing the man who steered the horse to victory in the Lingfield Derby trial, Callum Shepherd. Callum Shepherd's quite high-profile weekends. He's been riding quite a lot of nice horses this weekend as well, including Isle of Jura at Goodwood for George Scott, after which Callum shared his thoughts on the jockeying off with Rishi.
Obviously disappointed. It's been a challenging week, but there's not really anything more to say than that. My part in the Derby story is now over. As much as I don't want it to be, I'm going to have to deal with that and live with that. And obviously, I have a lot of respect for Rab, and it's his time.
Can I just ask about your reaction to, or your thoughts on the reaction? Perhaps, I don't know if you've seen much of it on social media or people speaking out in the press, etc. Most of it, obviously, in support of you keeping the ride, and just what that means to you.
Yeah, I suppose it is going to be a time where you're slightly vulnerable, and I think I did get a lot of supportive messages, and that, probably more than I expected, and from a real diverse range of people, some very well-respected people that I wouldn't have thought would reach out, and I do appreciate that, because it's tough. But as far as sort of social media, you see both sides of it. Perhaps it's been spoken more in my favour this week, but it can be an ugly thing, and it's not something I want to really take too much time thinking about.
Is it easy just to focus on the job in hand? Does it help in a way that you just want to get on with riding?
Yeah, got to let my ride and do the talking. I'll be just fine. You watch me, I'll be fine.
Thank you. Thanks.
A nice little note of defiance at the end there from Callum Shepherd as well, who I think has the sympathy of an awful lot of people. And as he said, it's Rab's time, and no doubt his time will come. What did you make of that one? Okay, before we start, you're not allowed to say the words, "It's the owner's horse, he's entitled to do what he wants." Because obviously that goes without saying. I've banned that phrase from this discussion.
Yeah, purely from Callum's point of view, it's very hard not to feel hard done by. He has, I know from he's a good friend of mine, Callum. He's put a lot of work into that horse. Through the spring, it was quite keen at Newmarket. They did a lot of work between James and Tom. Have done a fantastic job getting the horse to settle with Callum's help, and I think he's been unfairly treated.
Do you think that's the bit that sticks in the craw more than anything else? The fact that it's been a bit of a project for him. It's not just, I've been riding it in races.
Yeah, exactly. He's had an association with the Gredleys for a number of years now. He's put an awful lot of time into this horse particular. By definition, he had done nothing wrong, and I can't say that.
No, I was only being facetious, you know what I mean?
I do feel. I really feel for him, and I feel that he deserved his chance.
And of course, the sort of irony here, Lee, is that this is a horse that a lot of people have been, and to an extent still are, rooting for. Rab Allen's a very popular guy.
Yeah.
James Fanshawe, everyone wants to see him with a good horse. It's not Godolphin, it's not Coolmore.
Yeah, but this has tainted that, I mean, short of announcing this decision in pouring rain at a podium on Downing Street, it's hard to imagine this could have had a worse reception. It is bewildering. It really is bewildering. And that isn't meant to be any sort of slur on Rab Havlin, but it is the case that Rab is number 2 jockey to the Gosdens. When Frankie retired, he wasn't in line to take that job. They brought in Kieran Schumacher over him. Even though Rab is a very good jockey, he would not have the elite status of someone, for example, say, like, if the Gredleys had said, we're going to replace Callum Shepherd with James Doyle or with Christophe Soumillon or with someone who was recognised as one of the very top-tier riders, you might say, well, Callum might think, OK, well... But it feels as though he's been replaced by someone who sort of rides at the same perceived level as him, and that must make it harder to understand. And although, Nick, you are right, in the sense that we shouldn't be saying owners have every right to do what they did.
Of course, because it's kind of... It goes without saying.
But it also goes without saying that it's hard not to see this as an act of disloyalty. He's had an association with that horse. He's done a very good job with that horse. A horse who's not the easiest horse in the world to ride, and they've replaced him after an easy trial victory. I
feel like I've got time up my sleeve. I just want to go off on a little bit of a tangent. When it comes to a high-profile ride like this, let's face it, there are very few of them knocking around in a race like the Derby. Mm-hmm. How aggressive would your colleagues be in terms of going after that ride? I'm not talking about Rab Havlin. I'm talking generally.
I mean, it's been well known for years that Frankie was never afraid of ringing for rides in big races he thought he could win on, and that's...
And Piggott, of course, famously.
Exactly, and that's the nature. They're top-level sports people. They perform at that level for a reason, and if they think there's an opportunity somewhere, it's self-progression. That's the nature of the game. We're all self-employed. We all want to do the best we can, and that's the nature of competitive sport. There's no hard feelings, but it's dog eat dog.
I was told a great story by an old jumps jockey a few years ago about how he used to give this friend of his, they used to ride together a lot, he used to always give him a lift to the races. And he'd pull into the service station, they'd be chatting about their rides on the way up, whatever, rides for the rest of the week, and he'd pull into the service station, fill the car up with diesel, go in and pay, and as he was paying for the diesel, his mate would be on the phone trying to nick his rides for the rest of the week. Oh, it's tough out there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very hard sport, and we've all got our sympathies with Callum's position, but I hope he gets the opportunity either later in the season or again.
Yeah, and it wouldn't surprise you, would it? Let's talk about this. Is an equally interesting story. Economics would have been a heavy favourite, maybe even an odds-on favourite for the Derby if he'd run, having hacked up in the Dante. And it's interesting, Lee, I think that people are considering this to be a conservative move by William Haggas. I would suggest it's kind of unusually radical in a sense, insofar as since about 83, I went back, apart from the COVID year, every horse that had won the Dante had either run in the Derby, the Irish Derby, or the Prix de Jockey Club. Are you surprised that he's not going to target any of those races?
I'm surprised that the fact they're not going for the Derby, they're then not going for the Prix de Jockey Club.
That was the bit that surprised me a little bit, I think.
But in some ways, it makes his decision more understandable, because it gives the impression that it is not purely because he feels this horse is not physically best equipped to handle Epsom, or that he feels a mile and a half would be too much of a stretch on the horse's stamina. It also suggests he feels that this horse is very much a long-term project, and going to such a demanding contest as a Derby or a Prix du Jockey Club at this stage of his career would potentially be a negative move for the horse in terms of his future. That is clearly what they are thinking. But it's a heck of a bold move, isn't it? Because William Haggas, like any other British-based trainer, would love to win the Derby. He's won one before. He'd love to win another one.
If you know Sheikh Issa a little bit,
yeah,
he is, and he wouldn't mind me saying this, he is your ultimate racing geek. He absolutely loves it. I mean, the idea of having a runner in the Derby for him would be everything. So it is. Yeah. It's unusual, isn't it?
Yeah, you make a good point with Sheikh Issa. I mean, that would be a massive achievement for them to win the Derby. So it's a bold route they're taking. I think you're right. It's fairly radical in the unconventional sense. My only thought on it was perhaps it was well documented he bled after York, and whether they're just concerned that he's going to need more time.
Just back off.
Exactly,
yeah.
And it's not the be-all and end-all if he has bled, but sometimes horses can take a lot of time to get over that.
Yeah, I asked William Haggas about the bleed this week on the podcast, and he said, we've scoped him and there's nothing, we can't find anything there, but it would still be just...
It's enough of a question mark that, like you say, going to a big occasion, either a French Derby or an English Derby, you need to be A1. Regardless of how impressive he was in the Dante, if you've got that niggling doubt, it's enough to put you off going.
He's a monster, this, isn't he?
Especially if they regard him... I mean, he looked exceptional in the Dante, and if they regard him as highly as it appears they do, they're not going to risk that if he could be a very special horse further down the line.
And William Haggas is also, of all trainers, he's one who is very much sure of his own opinion. Remember, it was only a couple of years ago we had that great debate, Baid, will he want to go for the Arc? Now, everyone was saying, go for the Arc, but he didn't want, and he stuck by his guns.
I think he wishes he'd run him in the Irish Champions Stakes.
Yes, but as the
Arc tried to shut the surround sound out.
Yeah. As the way that Arc panned out, given the ground conditions, that would never have been right for him anyway. So he was right not to go for the Arc.
Just one last bit on this.
Yeah.
I can hear my producer groaning in my ear.
Was he not crying?
But frankly, the calibre of these, I mean, they're very dry.
Dry brioche.
Very dry this week. Yeah. Your colleague, Chris Cook, wrote a really interesting piece where he said, and this is nothing to do with whether it's right or wrong to run with whatever. It's the way that we as the racing public have reacted to it with a kind of, yeah, fine, whatever. Almost not bothered that the horse who's clearly the best 3-year-old colt is not running in the Derby, and that the sport just waves it along. And shouldn't we be a bit more bothered, Chris was basically saying.
Akin to the sad, mad, bad reaction.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Of course, Peter Saville, 1990, whatever it was, 5, sad, mad, bad. And he ran in the Prix de Jockey Club.
He did.
It's not like, Celtic Swing.
Yeah, he did. And I absolutely understand Chris's point of view. And I think the logical conclusion, the logical consequence of that is that are we saying that we ourselves have less confidence in the Derby as a product.
Well, I was thinking of poor old Tom Sams there, who came on. He doesn't want me to call him poor old Tom Sams. Tom Sams, young guy trying to do a big job for a big race.
Yeah.
I mean, should we be giving a bit more help?
Yeah, and clearly you want the best horses running in the Derby. But I'm just not convinced myself that what has happened here says anything about the Derby as a contest, as an attraction. We know how the breeding industry has changed, and we know that Derby winners are not the commercial attraction that they were 30, 40, 50 years ago. We know that, but I still think if William Haggis really believed economics could or would win the Derby,
he'd be running
in the Derby.
Let's talk about the Anglo-Irish classifications. This is jumping. I presume it's not really Anglo, but mainly Irish.
Well, it's Irish at the top of the...
And Anglo at the bottom.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a sense, that's where the story is. We knew, for example, that Galopin des Champs was going to top the classifications, and he's done so with the same rating that he received last year for his Gold Cup success. We knew that State Man would be topping the hurdling classifications, and he does. Sadly,
how far ahead of Constitution Hill is he, based on Constitution Hill's Christmas hurdle victory?
£10, wasn't it?
Really?
I think it was 16915 out the top of my head.
Wow.
But what we also knew, Nick, was that this would not be a good news story for British jump racing. And it isn't. Just looking at the numbers here. So the number of British-trained hurdlers rated 150 plus. Well, it was 35 4 seasons ago. What do you reckon it was last season?
150 plus British-trained hurdlers.
35 4 seasons ago.
Oh, 10?
13. Good guess. 13. 35 to 13. Chasers 150 plus from 76 4 seasons ago.
Oh, this could be grim. 40 odd, 50 odd.
42. Yeah, you're on the mark. Really stark drops. And Martin Greenwood, senior BHA handicapper, who now handicaps Grand National, in his commentary last week, he wasn't trying to hide the fact this is a serious issue. He made the point that we talk about these things go in cycles, but how long a cycle is this going to be? When you look at the novices, there wasn't really much in the way of rays of light for British jump racing in terms of the novice brigade. They're not really coming through, certainly not among the hurdlers. So this isn't going to change any time soon. Changes have been made to the British Jumps pattern programme in a bid to make things better. I think I was involved in it. I think they're largely very positive changes, but you can't just bring in a new group of horses at a click of a finger.
Hector, do you follow the jump racing much?
Outside of the major meetings, not particularly, but it's been fairly obvious to see. It's been an Irish domination near enough all season long.
Was it ever an option for you?
I once rode in the flat jockeys jump race at Lingfield, and that was enough to make me see that was not a very sensible career.
Because presumably, having spent a lot of time at the moors, you'll have been surrounded by it a fair bit.
Yeah, well, I was always involved in the jump racing, but I was considerably smaller than I am now. I was tiny as a 16, 17-year-old coming through, so it was never really entered my brain. But no, it's not my cup of tea.
Very sensible. The Brigadier Gerard. I wonder what the grand old horse, one of the great horses of the modern era, would have made of the edition run in his name at Sandown Park earlier in the week. Winner might be nice, Lee.
Winner might be nice, Royal Rhyme, yeah, but it was as bad a Brigadier Gerard as I can ever remember. It was a really, really disappointing, poor renewal, albeit with a good win.
Try and make people feel better at the end of this show. Yeah. We're not doing a very good job today, are we?
Nick, rewind 12 months ago, and we had Hookham and Desert Crown locking horns in the Brigadier Gerard, and you would have said that was as good a Brigadier Gerard as you would have remembered for a long time. And although we have the proximity between the Brigadier Gerard and the Festival Stakes, which this year were less than 24 hours apart, that was again the case pretty much last year when they were 2 days apart. It was a disappointing renewal. but I don't think we should set too much store by one bad running of a race. There are issues with the Brigadier Gerard. If you look, for example, at the Group 3s at the Chester May Festival, they're run for £140,000. This was run for £85,000. Big gap, but that still means it's more valuable than every Group 3 race run in France.
Indeed.
So it's not a badly remunerated contest. For whatever reason, it didn't have a strong field this season. Maybe among that division, the pool of horses just isn't there in 2024.
And of course, the Derby is quite early this season as well. But then, of course, that affords us a bit more time between the Derby and Royal Ascot. Right, those were this week's talking points.